So welcome everyone. This is our 64th speaker series. We started in May of 2015, so it's pretty amazing to think of what we have accomplished. Tonight we are welcoming Meng. He is the executive director for the Food Preservation Arts, for the Center for the Food Preservation Arts, and their lead instructor too. So he will tell us more about that. I will tell you a little bit about the center that I've got pulled up on my phone here. The Center for the Preserving Arts promotes community through the sharing of knowledge and techniques and the very active food preservation. And I love the philosophy that we can take control of our own food from seed to shelf and table. So we're going to learn some of the basics of home preserving, but also how they use home preserving to benefit others, which is a great, they've incorporated it into a ministry, which is wonderful. We will be taking a free will offering tonight, just as we always do. So far, we have given over $4,430 to local charities and organizations based on our speakers choosing. Pastor Sarah just put the link in the chat, but you can pay via our app or on the website or via at church via a check. Just write food preservation in the memo so we know which speaker to share it with, and then we will get that passed on to Hal and his center. So we appreciate that. And then just to let you know, up next, February 10th is Electric Vehicles Are Easy to Fall in Love with Melissa Ann Troy, who's the outreach manager from Puget Sound Energy. So that's coming up fast. So it's been a great month of good speakers. We had a great COVID speaker last week, popped an extra one in because it was so timely and so important. So Hal, it's all yours. Thank you for being here tonight.
All right, well, thank you. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come and meet with all of you and tell you a little bit about what we do in the community. We'll also have some time I can answer any questions about what we do, but also if you have food preservation questions, we can delve into that a little bit. And hopefully I might inspire you to volunteer with us or perhaps start your own group because I find it hard sometimes to wrap my head around the fact that it really is what we're doing a ministry. Since I'm not directly connected with any one church, but interestingly enough, since I started this, I have been in more churches more times than I had done for a long time, because there is that same interest, that same feeling of taking care of the community. And also a lot of churches have commercial kitchens. And that's what we use. That's one of the misconceptions sometimes because of the Center for Food Preservation Arts. People think that we have like a building, but actually it's centered more in the idea of where things come together and where the center focus is. So I guess, let's see, I give a little bit of background, but this is a small enough group. If any time during this you have questions, I know there's a raise your hand thing in Zoom, but we can probably just have you wave and then we can, answer your question immediately. I don't mind that. But a little bit about the background. I grew up in a small town in southeastern Idaho where the culture there was a lot about family, community, things like gardening, food preservation, and bartering were just part of life. It was kind of later on I learned where the term bee came from in terms of things like quilting bees, barn raising bees, things like that. It actually comes from a German or possibly they think Old English word, which roughly translates as activities taken on by neighbors for the benefit of all. And that's kind of how the community I grew up in worked, is almost everything was some type of bee. But this was, I reached my teenage years when I was in the 70s. Small town in southeastern Idaho, was a little behind the times. So I was probably one of the first, maybe the only hippie in that community. Um, and so I kind of turned my back on all of those things. And I never really got back to it until I was in my 40s. And what caused me to come back to those ideals was that I had lived through a number, I don't even count them anymore, of natural and other disasters, things that included fires, forest fires, earthquakes, and the Teton Dam flood, which destroyed my parents' home in Rexburg, Idaho, where I grew up. And so I had been inspired to start volunteering with disaster relief groups. And I would mostly be brought in after I didn't have the skills or training as a first responder. So I have basic training, but would come in and work on things like helping with recovery and directing resources, things like that. Because my training was, believe it or not, as a production and a stage manager for live theater. So I was really interested in organizing details. So I was kind of good at that. But it gave me the opportunity to observe how people would respond to these things. And the communities that recovered faster seemed to be the ones where there was already activities that they had done before that built mutual trust and taught skills and helped people to focus together on goals. And so that's when I learned the definition of that word be. And it was, very enlightening to me. And so after 9/11, I decided I really wanted to try and pursue more of those activities in Tacoma and Pierce County. And at that point, I didn't see any kind of canning or things. There were a lot of community gardens, which I also became involved in, and I also gardened a lot. But I became involved in barter groups. And I actually started one, the Fair Trade and Barter. Uh, and people would meet several times a year, hopefully once a month, and exchange homemade goods and crafts and things. And a lot of those included homemade canned goods. And even though I didn't have as much of the training as I have now, some of those canned goods just scared the bejesus out of me because I could just tell. I mean, they were in mayonnaise jars and the lids weren't on all the way. And I decided, you know, this would be a really bad risk for all these people who are coming in trusting. And since canning was in my heritage, I decided that if I could get some more training, which I did through several different sources, I would try to teach safe food canning at home and in small groups, and hopefully maybe inspire people to do more of it. Now, I was still working full time, and so it was as late as 2013 when I started teaching regularly. But by 2015, there was a small group of us that were very interested in seeing where we could go with this. And we formed the Center for Food Preservation Arts. And I'm going to try and share my screen now so that we can get into it. Okay, is that come up okay for everybody? Okay. So this is our logo, and one of my friends designed it for us. And it's like this, we have viewed that there are four major tools we can use. Providing access, so we borrow the use of some community kitchens. At one point we had 5 going, and then the pandemic happened, but we'll get into that history later. Education, supporting people in their efforts, especially, if they're a little shy to get together with other people and then building community through it. So this is kind of like our catchphrase or our motto, because we're building together a community through the practices of food. And so this is basically, I guess you'd say, it's our mission statement. One of the things that always amazed me was when I started reading about how that there is more than enough food in the world. It's just, it doesn't get distributed evenly. That wasn't supposed to happen. I thought I'd fix that. It's not an unattainable idea. And we decided that the best thing to do was to work locally. In fact, even work in very small groups. So a lot of our work, when we founded, okay, sorry about that. At one point, this was an automatic show, and I guess I missed removing one of those. So bear with me, go back for a second. So some of our places were even very small, just small groups of maybe 5 to 10 people centered around one of the kitchens. And so why food? Well, one of the first experiences I had that pointed out to me how fragile all of our food systems are was when I was down in Mexico City. And it was during a bird flu scare. And in an hour, everything, including everything else that you see in that store, was gone. And I thought, wow, and I remembered that later and go, oh, stuff like that couldn't happen. And then there were things like hurricanes here in this country, floods in this country. And then, of course, we all know what happened in 2020. So I hope all of you have a good stock of toilet paper in case it happens again. But there's so many ways that the food system can fall apart. Climate, already there's a lot of warnings about the things that have happened in the past 2 years, climate-wise, that we haven't noticed because everybody's been focusing on COVID. But there's going to be a lot more scarcity of a lot of the commodities that were produced simply because of flooding and climate change. But then there's also the transportation issues. Back when I originally started doing these type of presentations, the only transportation issues we think about were like disasters, like bridge collapses. Well, obviously now we realize this, the whole intricacy of the supply chain. And so the roads and everything can be fine, but there still may not be everything that's needed. And we often think, it's only going to be some kind of major disaster or a zombie apocalypse. But if people prepare and have some things set aside, personal setbacks like losing a job, yourself or some member of your family being very ill will not be as detrimental. And then, of course, pandemics themselves, where we can't get out. And another reason to preserve your own food, whether individually or in community groups, is having more control over the ingredients. While, our food laws say that they should list everything, often they don't. Or they do it in a very sneaky way, like with corn syrup. Corn syrup can appear on labels by many, many different names where you wouldn't even recognize it's corn syrup. And these statistics are a couple of years old, and I have no idea whether they've gotten better or worse. But since 2017, when I started doing these presentations, every year it's gotten worse. So I have no indication that it hasn't now. And salt is the other thing that there's just way too much of in commercially produced foods. I'm a diabetic, so I have to watch every source of sugars. And also because there's a history of heart disease in my family, I have to watch everything, how much salt and sodium is in it. And so it just became easier for me to make my own food a lot rather than relying on commercial. Although there's nothing like a good cheeseburger. Um, and then contamination. I mean, constantly. I now, because of the work that I do, I'm on a weekly Sunday night mailing list from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where they announce all the things that are being recalled or they think have possibilities of needing to be recalled. And the list will sometimes go on for pages and pages. At least when you're canning things in group or at homes, it moves through less sets of hands. There's also the issue of cost. Now, the exact same ingredients are in this commercially produced green beans as are in these 6 jars. And the 6 jars, including buying the jars themselves and lids, comes to about $6, where right now on the store shelf, the other product is $7.21. You're paying for the label, basically. And then food deserts. A lot of people don't have access to healthy food because the major chains, it's not profitable enough for them to continue. So the alternatives are either to travel, and often they may not have reliable transportation, or get a lot of their meals out of 7-Elevens and gas stations. And this film, Just Eat It, used to be available on YouTube. Yes, I think it's still out there. But this quote from Tristan, we are trashing the land to grow food that nobody eats. There's millions of pounds of fruit and vegetables that ends up in the trash every year. And I am happy to say that that is getting better. That's one of the things that there's more awareness of. And even though I'm not a great fan of commercializations, things like misfit foods and things like that are a good thing in my opinion. At least they're constantly, their constant ads on YouTube are bringing awareness of the fact that food that isn't as pretty is still perfectly good or can be. And so these are 2 brochures we have, but it kind of sums up some of the tools we use. By working with different churches and other nonprofits, was when I was exposed to the concept of time, talent, and treasure. And that's what we rely on because 95% of our labor and all of our products and everything is donated or volunteered. And what we have to offer for volunteers, this is getting really irritating, and my apologies, are learning, sharing, and growing together, building communities, developing skills, and supporting resilience by making community. And this is a good example of many of our classes and activities can be a whole family event, or like in this case, they're all seniors and many of them have disabilities, but we can adapt for people sitting. And then during the pandemic, we were fortunate enough early on to be approved by the health department as an essential service because, as I'll explain later, we're doing a lot of work with food banks and feeding ministries. That's part of why I do these things, is to encourage other groups to start similar projects. So as we've been working together, many of the groups that formed had cohesion and would work together often and got talking about that they felt they should give back to the community. And so based on some models that were down in Oregon, the Jammin for the hungry, as they called it, I went down and studied with them, and they had an amazing program because especially in some of the places were situated near a lot of berry farms and berry wholesalers that donated massive quantities of frozen berries. And that every week, the Jammin for the Hungry would bring in students from the local colleges and make hundreds and hundreds of jars of jam that were given to all the small food banks and feeding ministries in their area. And we decided, because some of the things that were most available here were plums, some berries, and then apples, we focused in on making applesauce and different kinds of jam products because we could get a lot of those through the official gleaning programs. And also, it's a slightly less stringent codes, which we'll talk about in terms of being able to do them safely when they're jammed or preserved, like in sauces. This year, though, we're working on expanding out into pickles, cucumber pickles and bean pickles, and we'll see how that goes. So the Preserving for the Hungry program is quite popular. This is a note that somebody, when they returned the jar, had put in it from one of the food banks, and that really touched us all, and we held on to that. And one of the things that we do is use this program to reduce waste. As I mentioned, we get a lot of fruits and things from donations, especially through what are basically recognized gleaning programs. There's basically two levels of regulation, and I can get into that. I also tend to be a little bit freeform. When a subject, I will follow that, I'll fall down that rabbit hole. And if I go too far down the rabbit hole, somebody pull me out. But I should get you home by 10 or 12 tonight. But basically, what we do when we get like apples in, which often come in multiples of 40-pound boxes, is we get a group of people together and we peel them, cut them up into a manageable size, treat them with some lemon juice, and then freeze it so that we can make applesauce later in vast quantities. And so here you see these are 2-gallon bags of frozen apples. Everybody, can you see my pointer while I do this? Okay. And then also, though, to get Titus through the winter when there's not any fresh berries to be gotten through gleaning, etc., is we do have arrangements with different places that will give us big discounts on buying frozen vegetables and things. I won't mention, but I'm sure the Kirkland brand is familiar to folks. And we build networks. These are two different groups who've worked together a lot. And they do all different kinds of things. We had taught and did some classes on dehydrating, and that's what they're working on here. And here they're making for themselves. That's one of the rewards that we do, is we do canning classes for people who volunteer, where they make things for themselves and their families. And we provide all the materials and the instruction. And they're making blackberry rhubarb lime jam, which is one of our most popular products, things like that. And so I mentioned we teach and refresh skills. A lot of our work we like to do in person. We like to try and teach proper techniques, like you see here, guarding with your knuckles. You know, I ran through this slideshow 4 or 5 times today, and that didn't happen. So I don't know why it started tonight, just to bug me, I'm sure. But then when the pandemic started, we got the idea to switch into doing a lot of online. And I'll make sure that I send all the links, um, and they will be sent out to you from the chat and things. But we have a YouTube channel as well as a blog where we have recipes and articles. And on the YouTube, I do a number of demonstrations. And I'm really fortunate because one of the sites that we work at, the Point Defiance Rusted Senior Center, when the pandemic closed them down, their director there, Kate Gray, wanted to continue to provide things for the population because it's a very popular senior center. And a lot of them, that was their main activity. And so fortunately, like 99% of them have access to the internet. And she studied and worked hard and taught herself video production. And so she produces our videos and puts them on, and then we put them on our YouTube channel, as well as they put them on their Facebook page. This is one of the favorite things and they're also trying to get permitting to make that and distribute, is what's called the best ever salsa. And the salsa is, of course, made from tomatoes, but it's given us an opportunity to teach and practice something that we just call the whole hog technique, where that was an old phrase about using every part of the pig except for the squeal. And so we look at everything that comes off of the products and try to use every part of it. And so these were tomatoes that were frozen, and then we would defrost them. And the nice thing about frozen tomatoes, you just squeeze the skins, you can pop all the meat and everything out of it, but it leaves you with all these skins. And the skins we've used to make tomato, we dehydrated and make a tomato powder, which you can add to any recipe and any sauce. Then we drain the tomatoes so that it makes a really thick salsa. Get back there, you stay, you stay. And the juice that's left, we put in crock pots and leave overnight with the lid propped up with like chopsticks, and it reduces it down. And so we make our own tomato sauce for the next batch. And then we put it into molds and freeze it in usable pieces. So it's all the way from frozen tomatoes to frozen sauce and canned salsa. And this is another example, since we have lots of plums in this area. It can make everything from prunes to the Japanese pickled to plum candy, jams and jellies, chutneys. And then the other process of using every part is to extract juice with a steam juicer, turn it into wine, and then wine, of course, can be turned into vinegars. So going all the way through that process. And we also try to always have as much fun as possible to keep things interesting. And I always love to include this in every program. And then these are some of the resources. We have our website, which is run on a blog spot, Facebook page, YouTube channel, email, and the phone number. And we'll send all of that stuff out. And so that's kind of the end of the PowerPoint. But now I'll stop sharing, and I really would encourage folks, if you have any questions, either about this kind of a program or anything about food preserving. But let me start. Let me ask you, how many of you preserve food? And it doesn't have to be canning. It could be extensive freezing. It could be dehydrating. Yes. Sonia, can you unmute her, or do they mute themselves?
I'm unmuted.
Okay. So what do you do or make?
I can pretty much anything possible. I do jellies, sauces, pickles, spaghetti sauce, tomato sauce.
Excellent. Do any pressure canning?
I do.
Ah, excellent. Good. You know, a lot of people are scared of pressure canning, and they really don't need to be. You just need to be, you need to follow the rules for it
It was
because
terrifying at first, but it's really simple once you get going on it.
exactly. And the whole fear of like them exploding and things like that, it way in family traditions are blown out of proportions. Usually, how many of you have had any experience with pressure canners, even if you don't? Bueller, anybody?
Like a pressure cooker?
Well, the pressure canners are a little bit different, but yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
basically the same thing.
Same thing, yeah.
Have you had any fear of your pressure cooker?
I just remember, you know, other people cooking, and I was just kind of fascinated by all the noise and the, you know, vibrating and all that stuff. But
Oh,
yeah,
the rocker
it's like,
and that?
yeah, all kinds of stuff going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's basically two kinds that tell you if you're up to pressure. There's the rocker weight, which was the old one. Like there was one that would rock when it reached 5 pounds, another 10, another 15, which are the standard pressures. But I first learned on a gauge type pressure canner. And so I'm just really attached to the gauge. But yeah, a lot of the stories about pressure canners exploding and all that stuff are way out of proportion. Um, one of one of the USDA programs I took that dealt with some of the pressure cannings, and then the big commercial one, retorts, are the accidents are usually caused by impatience and operator error. Like for example, taking this thing which has a minimum of 15 to 20 pounds of pressure in it. And everything in a pressure canner, the reason you use it is because a lot of things like botulism will only be killed at above 212 degrees. And so a pressure canner basically, a lot of you may already know this, but the higher you go in elevation, the less air pressure it is, and water will boil at a lower temperature. So the more pressure there is, the higher the temperature is where it boils. And so a pressure canner gets up to 240 to 250 degrees, and it has all this pressure. And some people were so impatient that they'd pick up this big hot pressure canner and put it in ice water, and they would crack and explode, because the metal wasn't built to do that. Sometimes if the jars are improperly sealed, they'll break in the canner. But also sometimes, even though you have to wait for the pressure to come down all the way, you take the lid off. If the lid wasn't put on properly, the contents are still boiling at a very high temperature when you take the lid off, or can be. And I've had one explode and shoot tomato product all the way up to the ceiling. So that's why they always warn you, both with a water bath canner or a pressure canner, when you take the lid off, make sure no one's standing behind it, and keep the lid between you and the contents as you take it off. So that's just a little safety tip. Anyone else have any food preservation? As we continue talking, you just throw them in at any time. How many would be interested in supporting some kind of food preservation for pantries or food banks or things like that, either in your own community or in some other?
What would that look like?
What would it look like? Well, usually it's kind of pretty. No, excuse me. Basically, what you need to do is find a group of people who are interested in exploring that, and then find what would be defined as a commercial kitchen. And that could be most churches that serve meals that are produced there at any time have commercial kitchens. And so the way to begin is to find a group of people, and it can be just a few people, and the facility, and begin by just getting together and canning for yourself as a group. If you don't know how to can and follow some of the rules, which I'll talk about a little bit, kind of building up towards being able to give it out to the public. So there's like 2 different layers of rules and guidelines. And when you say rules, everybody goes, I don't want any more rules. But I would say that 99% of these have a reason, and they're for safety, like health department rules, like wash your hands. Now they're pretty much thinking they're going to make it mandatory that people will always be wearing masks when they cook. Men, for example, or I guess it could be women who had facial hair and beards would have to wear what I lovingly call a chin diaper, but it's like the beard masks. And so I was actually quite happy when we had to wear full masks, because I'd always wondered, if you're only putting this thing over your chin and you got a mustache, that doesn't quite balance out to me. But so when everybody who's going to be using the product or giving it to their friends and family are involved in some way with making it, it's one level of regulations and practices. If you are moving into the realm of third party, which they also call commercial distribution, even if you're not, like we're not a commercial thing except for the IRS, even though we're giving it away, we're still a producer. And a lot of the people who get the preserving for the hungry products have never met the people who make it and don't see how it's made. So there's a higher level of guidelines to ensure its safety. And so that's one of the things that you don't want to jump right into, because it can be confusing. So you really need to start developing a group of people who are interested in doing that. And if you have an organization, or if somebody has the funding, each license is attached to the kitchen or the site you're making it in. And they're about $95 a year to be licensed. And beyond that, pretty much everything else you can find ways to get donated. The jars, the produce. And so if it was a very small operation, 3 or 4 people could make it run. But you're always going to have a certain degree of devotion to it. And you're going to have somebody who puts their name on the license and is ultimately responsible for things. And so that's why you really want to find and make a coherent group before you jump fully into it. But, at first I was hoping that we could have all these different big sites everywhere and all that stuff. And the more I worked with it, and then when the pandemic hit and 3 of our sites were closed, 2 of them never reopened. And one of them is a place that, it was the Food Connection in St. Leo's Food Connection in Tacoma, which is one of the larger food banks. During the pandemic, they found that the school lunches weren't happening, and they needed to shift everything in their commercial kitchen almost 24/7 into making school lunches. And so they very nicely asked us to move out, and we did. And, you know, God bless them, and they're doing tremendous work. But now we're down to just 2 sites. But also we're really working with different smaller groups to help them start. So it doesn't really have to be huge. I think that that's part of the whole thing, is to diversify and to make it smaller groups. Other comments or questions?
I'd like to start by maybe just teaching our kids how to can and trying to keep the process going. My 27-year-old daughter just was talking the day before yesterday that she wants to start canning. So
Oh,
we were
excellent.
talking about that. And I do freeze a lot and I dehydrate a lot, but I don't, you know, I make my own pickles and stuff, but I don't use a pressure cooker. I did with my mother-in-law, but she's so I've had a little bit of experience with it, but I like the gauge idea. And because we were going, well, maybe we should try electric. They're pretty expensive, but I like the gauge idea. So we might try something like that.
Yeah, and you know, not a lot of travel that I'd like to do, but I am willing to come and teach some classes at facilities. But we're also going to start, you know, the good Lord and COVID agreeing, start having more in-person classes. Because while things work fairly well with the demonstrations and stuff on the YouTube channel, there is nothing like hands-on experience with a lot of these things. And so we're hoping to start some of that. So we'll be posting all of those things, all public events, on our YouTube channel and on the Facebook. I'm also going to be doing a bunch of upcoming programs, like with the Pierce County Sustainability. We're going to be doing in April a program on fermentation. It's going to be another PowerPoint, but it's going to be another Zoom type thing. We do things with the Enviro House and with the Tacoma Office of Sustainability, all different kinds of presentations and things like that. Other questions or comments? Anything?
So I have just first of all, the YouTube videos. Is there a specific page that y'all have, or can we find it from your website, or where do we find those?
Yeah, there's links on it on the website, but I'll send, and it's well, let me. I unshared too soon. Let me go ahead and share this again. Okay, yeah. See, we have all of these, and I'll send those out, and they can be, you know, Robin or I mean, not Robin. Yes, Robin, we'll make you do it. But Gretchen can send you out these because I'm sure she has all your email addresses. And let me try this again and see if you can actually, if everybody can see it or if it will not come through. Okay, it doesn't seem to want to be doing that at all, but that's okay. Nope.
I did find the website, so I can share that if you want me to.
Okay, yeah.
Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that? Thank you.
Okay, I think you might have to stop sharing first.
Oh, yeah, probably. Yep. Yeah, 2 of us can't share at once.
Let's see. Screen share. Here's your website. Oh, well, this is. All right.
Okay, there we go. And on the website, you know, we have different things describing our program, education, support, community. And then we have collections of articles and things like that. Why don't you go ahead and click on the tab that says Post of Interest there for me, please? And you can see we've collected some of our articles into different categories, like a whole series on preserving through freezing, dehydrating and making powders, safe jams and jellies, pickling, and it will just keep growing. And starting in February, right now this is on Blogspot, which is limited, but we're going to be working on a more robust website through like WordPress or something like that. So it's more easily found. But yeah, those are some of the resources we have. Other questions? Anything else?
I have silly questions that I like to ask.
Uh-huh.
Like, what is your favorite like preservation process? Do you have a preferred method or technique?
It really depends on the product, but I love dehydrating because it takes less space. I don't think it actually requires more expenditure of energy. I mean, energy in terms of like electricity or gas or whatever than any of the other processes. But then any that you expend, you recoup by not having to refrigerate or freeze. So that takes that out. Plus, the shelf life is often a lot longer if it's properly canned or vacuum sealed and kept at the right temperature. Every freeze drying in a lot of ways is a superior process, but it's really unavailable to the majority of people because even a small freeze dryer costs thousands of dollars, and they're loud and they're much smaller in capacity. However, the food, the texture ends up to be a little better when you rehydrate it. And debate is still going on whether it actually stores longer or not. If things are stored in an oxygen-free environment that is like vacuum packed and they're kept below 75 degrees, they're right now debating which one maintains their nutritional value longer. But I like dehydrating a lot, but it really depends on the product. It's easier for me to say what technique I don't care for as much. And while I still make sauerkraut and kimchi and I make wine, I do not like to try and teach fermentation because people, unless they've taken a lot of canning, don't realize that they can't walk out of there with a finished product like you can with almost anything else. And so we will like do the whole process, make jars of sauerkraut to ferment in small batches, send it home with people, and I get a phone call that said, well, you warned us if there's bad scum on the top and it smells terrible and it's bubbling out of the jar. And so I'll ask him, well, what did you do with it? Well, I left it in the car overnight. Well, actually, maybe I left it in the car a couple of days, and this was in summer, things like that. And it's such a long process and so many variables get out of control that I don't like trying to teach that. I will do a demo on it and let people make something and take it away like a small jar, but promise nothing. It's an art. You need to just work at it. Wine making, I enjoy making wine. I have grapes. I like to make the juice, but then I also like to start the secondary fermentation and make vinegar from the wine, and also just use the juice. Have any of you used a steam juice extractor? It's really cool, and it's a very old technology. It kind of looks like a still in a way. It's got 3 sections. Good ones are stainless steel. In the bottom is a reservoir for water that you boil. You set this whole thing on a burner. And then there's like a cone-shaped part of it with a hole in the center. And that's where the steam comes up. And then there's a basket that sits in that. And the steam comes up and it keeps circulating around whatever fruit there's in there. So what you can do is like wash the grapes you just picked and throw them in. You don't even have to take the seeds out or anything. And the steam breaks not only the grapes open or the fruit or whatever you're using, but it also breaks the cells, and it draws the juice out. And that collects in the reservoir part in the bottom that the cone has come down to. And so there's like a plastic tube that comes out and you just drain it. I like to just set it up with the tube open into a collection bucket. And then you can freeze it, or you can reboil just the juice and pressure can it, or you can just water bath can it.
My next door neighbor and I, thanks to my next door neighbor, we have a lot of lavender, and I thought that she used something similar to that. It sounded like, to try and get the lavender oil or whatever.
Similar. It's a different process in a little bit of a way. And it's a much
Okay.
smaller kind of thing. My next step is, just because I'm fascinated with it, would be to move on to buying one of those small still units to make like brandies and things like that, like plum brandies and things out of the juice, the fermentation. So I like to practice fermentation for myself, but I don't like to try and teach it.
I did make kombucha for probably 2 years, but it was time consuming. And we did have one bottle that exploded. Thank goodness nobody was in the room. And there was shards of glass in the sheetrock. It was, so I was always careful.
Yeah, you can build up a lot of pressure in some of those processes. But yeah, fermentation is more of an art. Well, all of it has a certain art and science mixed together in it. I had originally started out, I thought I wanted to be a chemist. And then it turns out that I'm one of those rare people who have what is, I can't remember the technical term, but it's basically numeric dyslexia. I reverse numbers. And I have to think really hard, and working with canning and that process has taught me how to focus on it. But to do like formulas and hundreds of numbers every day, I just couldn't face that back in college. So I switched to going into clinical psychology and ran into the statistics, and that didn't work either. So finally I ended up in theater arts and got a degree in management. And so those management skills have helped me a lot in other things. Oh, I've done all kinds of things. I've been a house painter. I worked in collections for a while, which I did very good in because I refused to bully people. So, Anyway, enough about me. Tell me about you all. What do all of you do? Anybody start?
I'm in education, special education, consulting.
Excellent.
And I can say Sonia is the same because she's a good friend of mine. So we know each other from work. She's actually a psychologist and her doctorate, so she does more of the assessment and the cerebral stuff. I go to her when I need help. But she also cans a lot, and I have a lot of her canning as gifts in my house. So I eat her canning, so I can vouch for it.
That's one of the nice things about it, is you can really share. And sometimes, sometimes that opens whole new friendships. That's why I really miss the fair trade and barter group that we had. Because there's a lot of friendships built through that. Anyone else?
Sonia,
Well,
you can
I'm-
also speak for yourself.
I could, if I could have heard what was said. I just froze, so I literally got sound back when you said I can speak for myself.
Well, that was interesting. I hadn't seen that before. A little thing popped up that, said Sonia's internet speed is low.
Well, I'm the pastor of the church. I have like I don't like this pandemic has made me cook a lot more than I ever imagined cooking in my life. But I will say, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, I was in a very different place in life and job, and I was full-blown furloughed, and not knowing what that looked like meant like I didn't know about food, and had some people who were really into like canning and freezing things and doing that like she just came over with a box full of things that were she'd canned and frozen and stuff, and it got us through until we figured out unemployment and stimulus checks and all that. But it was absolutely, like you mentioned, seeing those natural disasters and those things, like and this person did this for multiple people. I was not the only one, but it's a true life-saving skill to be able to share that with others. So thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was really interesting at the pandemic when it all came out in the lockdown and stuff. And I'd look and see, and read about, and actually, I was going out to the store sometimes, but, like the toilet paper thing. And what just really surprised me was the fact, because of my work with CERT, community emergency resource teams, which are small kind of grassroots groups that learn like search and rescue light, we call it, and things like that to help out in the neighborhood, and talking about having, this base level of a couple of weeks of supplies. And I'm like, you don't have enough toilet paper? You don't have, because I got into this, I had some storage space, and basically I have one roll of toilet paper per week for a year. And it doesn't take that much space, and it's just there. But after the pandemic hit, I didn't hoard or gouge or clear the shelves. But when it was back there, I just went, okay, I'll never have to worry about this again. And, a number of cases of commercial soup. When I first started preparing, though, it was kind of ridiculous because I did it all at Costco. And I suddenly looked at my provisions for the future, and I'm going, what am I going to do with 48 cans of clam chowder? That's going to get really boring, and it can't be all that healthy. So, there's always, if you know how to do some of your own canning or preserving, you can have a much better balanced diet. And if you're relying totally, that's like people who go on all the like MREs and other preserved foods. If you eat those for a week, even MREs, you will be very sorry with your digestive tract, because they don't sit well on a daily basis unless you absolutely have to. So yeah, I've got some of the freeze-dried food and some of the MRE kind of things, but that's the last ditch. kind of effort.
We increased our garden and during the summer, just tried to eat out of the garden as much as.
I'm sorry, I lost that. We can't hear you right now.
You're
at least
muted, Terry.
Yeah.
There, sorry, my bar wasn't working.
Oh.
We just increased our vegetable garden, the last 2 years, and just really made an effort to eat out of the garden as much as we could. So, or preserve things from the garden, like the tomatoes, a lot of those. And everybody has fruit that they want to share. So yeah, we just tried to eat as much as from what we had, which was good. So
Yeah, it was. That was one of the nice things if you had a garden during 2020 and even 2021 was having that as a recreation and something that's producing for your family or friends. And then of course there's the dreaded zucchini overload. But being diabetic, I've shifted a lot towards other substitutes for pastas and things. So I was shredding and freezing a lot of zucchini. Well, unless you have other questions and things, I'm pretty much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Hal. It was great. Sorry, I dropped out for a while. I totally lost signal, but again, we are taking a free will offering that will go directly to the Center for the Food Preservation Arts. So you can give that via our website, via the app, or bring it to church. If you're one of our visitors, just reach out to us and we'll help you get connected. So we're glad to be able to support agencies like this in our community that really make a difference. So we're glad to do that. Up next, February 10th, electric vehicles are easy to fall in love with, so that will be fun. I'm going to add Hal to the mailing list, but if anyone else wants to be on the speaker series mailing list, let us know and we'll get you set up. And as always, we thank you so much for supporting us and being part of just learning and growing together.